this amazing space. It is so proper to begin a Pinay event that is stacked the way it is stacked. With poetry, all of us were doing that in college. Dear Brown Girl, remember those diaries we were gifted as young girls? Pale, pink, and floral, embossed with gold curly cues. Remember that tiny golden lock and precious key. Remember wanting to crawl inside and hide there. Remember how not speaking yielded so many secrets. Remember how you'd write and write, like if you didn't write, you would just die. Like if anyone ever read what you wrote, you would just die. They'd say, artista ka talaga. Sus Mario Seven. And you'd cry. Of course you'd cry. Remember when you were 19, your poems were so honey-coated. Your language was not really your language. It was so sugary, fancy, and high. You wrote about things you didn't know how to write about. 19-year-old girl living on top ramen at minimum wage. Remember how you blew a whole paycheck on a Waterman Laureate mineral blue fountain pen and tender purple ink. How you transcribed your finished poems into the matching hardbound violet marble journal edged with gold leaf. You loved that scratch of gold-plated nib onto paper. You gazed at each glossy page air-drying before you turned the page or closed the book. Dear Brown Girl, nobody ever read your poems back then. And then again, none of those poems were really for them. Diba? Girl. Dear Brown Girl, what if nobody reads you but every young, hungry brown girl who crosses your path? Please let them be visible to you. Their eyes are so wide, like they have rarely seen a woman like you before. They see you speak like you have forgotten the fear, the harm speaking brings brown women like you, daughters of spilling bodies and sutured mouths. They never knew brown women like you were real, speaking head held high, speaking like you know, because you know, and because you know that you know. They are holding your words so close to their bodies, the way we were all taught to cradle a newborn babe. Like they were taught to hold God's words so close to their hearts, they are breathing in your pages. They can't bear to remember what it was like before they ever found you. What if they are the only ones who will ever read you? And would that ever be so bad? Brown Girl Manifesto, hashtag all Pinay everything. If people still use hashtags, no. Old people use hashtags. That's because so much depends upon the suppression of us, the erasure of us, the omission of us. Because we are not meant to scald, to starve, to stuff into closets, because we have our own lyrics to drop, because we have inherited our mother's immodest tales. Because our nests and nooks hold buttons, stones, and string, pressed flowers, feathers, every rosebud, every bead, every tarnished charm, every scrap of paper nestled between rosaries, safety pins, and scapulars. There are always poems there. Because so much depends upon the blaming of us for birthing too many babies, for birthing none at all, because the unruled pages of this body refuses to be marked and ripped in two, because we bind our own perfect spines, because of the low hum soothing in our lungs, thrum in the throat, buzz in the skull till the head is numb, the body is a chamber of echoing song, scars are stories, healed fractures are as well. This, of course, you've heard before. But not all scars are bodily. Because we are razor-tongued. This, of course, you've heard before. Because we've been told since the beginning of time to hold our tongue lest we lose it. Because we still recoil at tender words. We remember the water's lullaby. Because we are a nation of the wretched and the occupied, we reclaim our elders' taken tongues, cut and burned. Because our foremothers were taken, cut and burned too. And so we offer words, verses to warm a balm. Because so much depends upon white nonsense and white fragility, Orientalists, white microaggression, white supremacists with their shotguns and tiki torches. Because telling us we don't fucking belong is an old and tired story. Because our being, our breathing, our speaking were never guaranteed. Because our fathers' bones rest in this land, and we have grieved too. And no, I will never leave this place. And no, I will never leave my father. Because of his roots and this land, they are also mine. Because so much depends upon vacuous speech. And so sometimes it is best to refrain from all human voice. Because when we sit with ourselves, there is just air, just light, and this is how we will come to listen. Thank you all very much.
I'm Allison Tintiaco-Cubales, and we have the honor of writing the foreword to this anthology. And just to share a little bit about our relationship to Pinaism. Well, I'm standing next to the person who coined the term, right? The person who thought about Pinaism. But I actually was introduced to Pinaism when I was an undergrad student in 2001, when I got my hands on a zine that talked about Pinaism. And the zine was called Penitration. It was based out of UC San Diego. And that was my first introduction to Pinaism. I read some poetry. I read about Pinaism. And then later on in 2006, I was working on my master's with Allison on Pinaism, but specifically Pinais pedagogy. And that's really the origin of the piece that we wrote today, thinking about how do we not only read this text, but then how do we also teach the text? And how do we bring it to our classrooms? How do we bring it to our communities? And in my master's thesis, my goal was to really think about how Pinais become agents of change in this side of education. In my thesis, I interviewed Pinay educators, not only in schools, but also in the community, to really theorize what Pinaism could look like in terms of creating a critical Pinay studies, but also fostering a community of Pinais for our futures. And so Pinaism is not just, there's so many authors in this book, but there's so many people who have also contributed to the ways that we write and the ways that we teach. We want to really acknowledge the ancestors who have informed our writing, especially those who have formed who we are as Pinais. We also want to acknowledge our family. But our families have also informed us in terms of our mothers, our brothers, our sisters, our daughters, our sons, our cousins. Many of us have been writing for people in our lives, right? And then we also think about what inspired Pinaism. And this is a picture of folks who were at the first Pinay panel at AAAS many years ago. And they are, the first people, we wanted to acknowledge them because they have really written about the stories of Pinais who informed what Pinaism is. And so the first article of Pinaism, the folks who are bolded are the ones who were interviewed for the first piece of Pinaism, but there are also all of these other people and other Pinais who continue to inform who Pinaism is. So we wanted to shout out all of these people because it's not just folks who have written these articles, but many people in the communities who have informed the practice of Pinaism as well.
You might recognize some of those names.
They're also in the book. And so the definition of Pinaism as it was written in 1995 is that Pinaism is a radical Pinay sisterhood that connects the global, local, and personal stories of Pinay struggle, survival, service, sisterhood, and strength to mentally, physically, politically, and spiritually uplift ourselves. Okay? And this was written in 1995, and throughout the years there have been many people who have continued to write about Pinaism. Okay? As I mentioned, I did write about it in the context of education, but others have brought it in the context of history, in organizing, and in the arts, in literature, in music and dance, Pinaism in queer communities, in mixed communities, in healing spaces, and in mother scholarship. Allison and I also recently wrote an article on Pinay's mother scholarship and the ways that we challenge anti-Asian racism in the classroom, but also in our lives. How do we bring that into our families, to our children? How do we teach for a Pinaist and liberatory future?
We wrote that article with 7 other Pinays during COVID. But, you know, like we were able to pull that together. To us, that was our way of doing Pinaism.
And then that definition has shifted.
Yeah. It's shifted. And this book, Closer to Liberation, gave us an opportunity to rethink it. At the same time, I was working with 2 students who were we were co-writing a piece on queer panexism. And so that shifted me as well. Oh my gosh, I just saw your face right there. Salute. So we added a few S's. During Jocel's master's thesis, she focused on the S's that are bolded there, but the ones that are brown were the ones we felt were missing. I can't even believe that we didn't have self-love as an original S. And part of it was because we were still kind of processing through that or I was processing it when I was writing Pinaism. And I think I'm still processing through this concept of self-love. And then the shape-shifting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the queerness of shape-shifting, and then the solidarity piece in conjunction with sisterhood. I think it'll go. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to put the 3 up here. These are the things that we added to Pinaism since our last article, yeah? This is in the book. But our focus on this idea of self-love, this idea that self-love is decolonial medicine, that we're constantly trying to figure out self-love. I don't know about the other Pinais in the room, but that's a struggle for me personally, and maybe us. We are consistently trying to figure that out. And it's getting better, and with texts like this, I'm like, oh, okay, we're cool. I mean, when Barbara was reading the 19-year-old, poetry piece, I was like, I saw you. At 19, we were roommates, so we saw each other a lot. But I was like, we saw each other, and we knew that at some point, we were going to have to make a big shift systemically for us to really be able to see not just ourselves, but then also our students and so on. And we've really been in this for 3 decades. So working on self-love for 3 decades, we got to at least love ourselves some, right? So we really worked on that. And then we believe that, without love, there's no liberation. I don't think that just, standing up and going out and protesting is enough. We've got to actually work internally as well. That's part of our activism. So shape-shifting is the next one. This is a fun one for me because I was thinking of the aswang. But I guess that there's other kinds of shape-shifting, like in Philippine mythology. But it is a nod to that. This ability to be and shift in different settings. What's really beautiful about the idea of shape-shifting was when I was working with Janelle Borja and Celeste Francisco on the panexism or the queer panexism article or chapter, they were like, look, you have to learn this at Alison, right? I struggled with using the word or identifier they. For a super long time. Sometimes I'll still make the mistakes, but knowing that that's actually a shift, and even our way of thinking is important. So I'm going to just read part of it. Shape-shifting also aims to push our thinking around gender expression, identity, specifically how our identities can be fluid, existing in liminality and multiplicity. We've made a lot of mistakes essentializing what it means to be Pinay, because that was what it was imposed on us. But there's all kinds of ways to be Pinay, and we should be in allowance of all of that. And then the last one is solidarity. This one was also like, how come we don't have solidarity as an S? That's weird, right? But I feel like we were so focused on the concept of sisterhood. And so the idea of solidarity is not to replace sisterhood, because sisterhood has actually been a serious critique of patriarchy. So I don't want to take out sisterhood. Solidarity is an addition to that. And solidarity is a focus on not so much sameness, because sisterhood sometimes, and Pinaism sometimes, really tries to get this idea of sameness. Solidarity is more about alignment, more about being, empathetic and being with people. And so I'll just read the last line here. Instead of replacing sisterhood, we add solidarity as an S because it is rooted in empathy rather than sameness. And so this whole process of working on the foreword for closer to liberation allowed us to rethink Pinaism in such important ways. And so I just want to say thank you, to the editors, including Jan and Candy and Amanda, because they allowed the opportunity for us to do that. I will also thank this person right here, because I don't like to write alone. That's a Pinaism thing. And so having Josil, be there, to co-write has always been, has always been my growth. There is one last slide, and I'll just show it to you. Our initial, we would say this a lot, pain plus love equals growth. And in 1995, I was a transition between undergrad and graduate school. And I was really into this idea of growing. We've got to grow, right? But I realized later on, after doing all of this work and watching people do Pinaism beyond me, was that it was more about finding a purpose. And that purpose was liberation, not just growth. What are we growing toward is what we started to think about. And in this book, that's what our focus is this idea of closer to liberation. So the new equation is pain plus love plus reflection equals liberation. So thank you, everybody. Test.
I promised her I'd keep in time, so. So we wrote a piece on imposter syndrome. I found that many of who we encounter, both students, colleagues, friends, family, wrestle with this in many ways. And so we wrote about this. So good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Liliane Bola-Villaraza, and I have the incredible opportunity to write this article on imposter syndrome with my kapatid, Dr. Melissa Ann Naviera-Lozano. Bahala from trauma to brilliance, how Pinexism, or Pinex, intergenerational wisdom, can break the cycle of imposter syndrome. Our exploration of imposter syndrome emerged from presentations we gave at the Asian Pacific American in higher education or PAHI conferences over several years, alongside our kapatid, Eric Aragon. We explored questions about the intersection of our work as academics, definitions of success, work-life balance, culture and language, and how to address the stressors that accompanied those conditions in a way that honored and gave credence to the variances of cultural values we have been raised with as Filipinexes in the diaspora. From the article, The idea of imposter syndrome comes from Pauline Clance and Susan Imes's study on the imposter phenomenon among high-achieving women, specifically in higher education. They defined it as an unwarranted sense of insecurity about one's position in their career, family, and social circles. These feelings disproportionately impacted people of color as a whole, but did not necessarily manifest as diagnosable conditions. Diagnosable conditions, that's very clinical, and I wondered about who gets to decide that. I would argue that this is not diagnosable in the Western medical sense because that would require the unraveling of centuries of learned conceptions of self that now show up as an unconscious, self-deprecating, diminishing actions and thoughts that are often manifest among formerly colonized group-centered cultures. Examples: whitening cream, valuing English more than one's native tongue, accent diminishing training. Some would say those things are necessary to get ahead. My question would be, who decided it was necessary? We suggest that there needs to be further consideration of cultural values and socio-cultural beliefs in the context of Filipinx community. That means addressing deeply held notions of shame, debt, and the need to sacrifice in order to belong. In other words, hiya, utang na loob, and pakikisama inform our own manifestations of imposter syndrome. Further, we posit that the Filipinx, particularly the diaspora, struggle with a collective imposter syndrome as we navigate intersecting and, at times, contradictory conditions at home, at work, and in the world. We suggest a different trajectory, that addressing imposter syndrome is a process of recognizing, acknowledging, and reframing. Part of that reframing is coming back to that sense of the collective, and that addressing imposter syndrome requires us to champion and cheer each other in ways that we have forgotten in Western capitalist and individualist social constructs. That it is not one or the other, it is not me, it is both, and it is we. This is what we call hard work. Our workshop at Apache on imposter syndrome was not about having solutions or clear strategies on how to address it. Rather, it was about opening the conversation and challenging ourselves and each other to reframe our understanding of utang na loob, hiya, and pakikisama, which Melissa will address later. All right, so you can hear me late. It all sounds very academic-y, right? The real of this is that Melissa, Eric, and I have been organizing and supporting each other for 20 years. And through all facets of life, grad school, career choices, where to live, marriage, partnerships, kiddos, and to combat our individual and collective imposter syndrome, we sit with each other. We share stories, we talk through feelings, and we learn from each other. We say when the imposter syndrome is bearing down, and we know we can turn to each other, ooh, girl. I'm running out of time, girl. So I introduced myself as Dr. Lilian Bolivar-Raza. I introduced her as Dr. Melissa Ann Rivera-Lozano. I learned that from Dr. Don Bojotano Bobado. And I did not do that out of arrogance or authority. I did it to acknowledge the pathways we walk together through the ugly. As community college professors, our work is often not seen as scholarly or academic enough, so I announce our titles as a way to champion and celebrate my kapatids, as an example of combating imposter syndrome. And that's where I'm going to start. See?
If we carry intergenerational trauma, and we do, then we also carry intergenerational wisdom. It's in our genes and in our DNA, says Kazu Haga. Our piece was really inspired by the 2018 project on Instagram. So if you go to Instagram and you take a look at the account called Bahalana 21st Century, created by Ate Omera Sagani, some of us may know her formerly as Perla Deila. She brought to us a visual of the way how we can think of Bahalana, not as giving up, not as it's up to you, hala, but rather an expression of hope. So I'm going to go and dive into these sort of cultural knowings or values we have in our families, our homes, and then move them into a reframing that brings us towards what Ate Allison says is pain plus love plus reflection equals liberation. Pakikisama. Some of us remember this knowing, this acquiescence. We learn how to perform in group spaces, and it gets tangled up with hiya. So for instance, pakikisama is when you're walking through a group, you put your hands in front and you shrink yourself so that you can make space. And then pakikisama is also a story I share in which I'm at a family party and my papa says, go ahead and get food, but remember everybody's watching you. So now pakikisama is noticing, how am I taking up space? Whose space am I taking up? Am I navigating it in the way that's proper for me, proper for my family? All of that way contributes to the imposter syndrome that we know. So we move towards pakikiramdam, right? Pakikiramdam is this request to feel in the same space with one another. In English, empathy, okay, but it's even more than that, right? It's being in someone else's shoes and then knowing that every act, intention, deed has also an impact on the other person. So we know pakikiramdam is something that we might ask when we say, did you eat? Let's eat together. That's pakikiramdam, right? Utang na loob, the forever debt, the debt you can never repay, the perpetual debt, the one that you cannot breathe, right? And then we hold that, we swallow that as imposter syndrome because, oh my goodness, all the work I've ever did to get up here, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough because it was somebody else, I owe it to someone else, my whole life to somebody else, right? And actually, utang na loob is not that. Through colonization, it gets twisted and messed up in that way. Utang na loob, in its origin, is an unspoken gratitude. It's a forever thank you, right? And it's the kind that spurs when we want to check in on a friend to make sure they're okay because they've checked in on us and we're genuinely curious, yeah? And so we move towards akbayan. Akbay is when you lean on your friend, you put your hand around akbay, right? Akbayan is how we hold each other up and it's essential to our well-being. Akbayan is different than crab mentality, taking each other down. It's uplifting, holding each other up, taking each other up as we move up, rooted in a radical trust in the way that Jen invites us, right, to donate, to call our representatives. Even if nothing comes back in return, we do it for each other because we trust we will hold each other up. Hiya. Hiya we know is shame. Pero hiya is more of a situational appropriateness. Hiya is something that you don't go to work wearing your underwear. You go home wearing your underwear. My kids don't call me Melissa. Hiya. I am mama. There's Lola, there's Nanay, right? That is hiya. That is what hiya is. Pero when hiya is twisted into shame, it debilitates us. Now hiya, if we make an error in the workplace, that becomes a marker of shame. Do we belong here? Should we belong here? I don't belong here, yes? Bahala na. It brings us to a place of well then bahala na, right? So we give up. We give up in the face of adversity. But on origin, the way that we know it through centuries is not giving up. It's an expression of understanding everything does not stay the same. It's an expression of understanding our impermanence, being comfortable with the unknown. We don't know what's happening tomorrow, pero bahala na. We will trust. We will do everything we can with the support of others to be successful, joyous, prosperous, and we trust the universe to see us through. It's hope, yeah? And so bahala na breaks imposter syndrome because we get to reclaim our right to be in alignment with what is meant for us. Any errors, any obstacles, no longer hiya. Pero they are signals, signs, ways of reading the world to bring us to where we need to be, to find our synchronicity in everything, yes? In our time, in our place, who is around us. This are these sacred signals that direct our way. That kind of bahala na is the one that guides our parents, our grandparents, who had to leave so we could be here. The OFW, the Navy sailor, the abused wife who had to run away to protect her children. That is bahala na, yeah? So breaking cycles. At the end of the day, as Filipino-American scholar, activist, educators, we carry the knowing that we cannot do this, as Liliana reminded us, alone. When we talk about trauma to brilliance, when we talk about this pain, right, into joy, we know that this is not a linear path. This is life. We might not ever get a clean break. The wounds might show up again. The pain might show up again. Pero what do we bring to break cycles of imposter syndrome? We bring each other.
We bring ancestral knowledge. We bring intergenerational wisdom for our collective well-being. So the call to action here is we invite you to join in building that kind of capacity to hold these tensions with us in our writing, sharing, and being wherever we are. There will always be a way. Salamat.
Here, maybe I'll just share a little bit of framing to get started. My name is Eileen, and I'm so honored to be here today. This feels like a reunion with old and new faces. And what I'm going to be sharing is a piece from Roots to Recipes, telling new stories to recover ancestral food. Good job. Yeah. Yes. Thank you to our tech. Thank you. So the question that drove me around this essay was this. Can you remember the things that you were supposed to forget? Can you recover the things you were supposed to forget? The question drew me because I was in a search for understanding the ways that our people are still and always will be people of the land and the water, wherever we are. It's in our DNA, it's in our blueprint, it's in the responsibility and kinship we have wherever we are now. And what began as what felt like an individual family story opened up into something much more collective, which I feel like is one of the common threads of today. So I'll begin here. A first summer of rediscovery of a cookbook only went a hunger for something I couldn't quite name. In the years that followed, like so many other first and second generation Filipino Americans, I became a student of history. I delved into stories of the Philippine-American War, the People Power movement, farm worker organizing. I was a young person who sought purpose. I looked to environmental justice as a place to find meaning. But coming home from heady meetings, my brain buzzing and heart on fire, what my body craved was comfort and warmth in my belly. I found this by returning to the rituals of the kitchen, in steaming pots of stew and rice, curled up with a steadily growing collection of books about our foodways. Amy Besla's Memories of Philippine Kitchens, Doreen Fernandez's Tikin became trusted teachers. Their words were part instruction manual, part celebration, all documentation of survival. Simmering sinigang, braising adobo, turmeric, vinegar, coconut hinted at the sour power of our origins. These recipes were reminders of an archipelago's survival and our diaspora through centuries of colonization. And while the act of cooking gave me personal comfort, our foods were meant to be shared in the collective. So I began to bring dishes to gatherings, to board meetings, to meals after protests, finding a small and everyday tribute to how food has always nourished resistance. In this world that's calling out for massive change, food was a window into what could be possible, distilled into a cooking pot and a bowl. So food tells a story of who we are. Maybe like many of you, I long to know that story as deeply as I could. And so years ago, in my early 20s, I left the Bay Area to apprentice on farms on California's Central Coast. And I pondered my family's concern. They were confused. Why would I willingly choose to work the soil? Their generation sought to leave these agrarian roots behind, often for traumatic reasons. And even though the majority of farmers worldwide are women and people of color, much of this country's recent back to the land movements of young people are often portrayed as a monolith of farm-curious, plaid-wearing, bluegrass-listening white folks. And I worried that I would become ungrounded in that world. But my worries subsided because touching the land feels like home. I will always remember the first time I sunk my hands into a bed of dark scented earth, how the seeds slipped through my fingers into these long rows, how I never felt so regal and satisfied until I was immersed in the act of growing food, and how I took pride in the dirt under my nails and the calluses forming on my palms. And at night, I would thumb through seed catalogs, soaking in the lore and imagining a future harvest. So bending towards the soil taught me another embodied story, one where agriculture or food production was more than a history of extraction or displacement, and even a place beyond struggle. At the core, I deeply sensed how our relationship, our original relationships to land, was of sustenance, food and life. Crops like eggplant, calamansi, bok choy, ampalaya are rich in history and flavors, and their seeds have crossed oceans, people and plants who have been pushed and pulled. All the experiences that we gather from the kitchens to the farm only strengthen my belief in the values of our heritage foods and the culinary intelligence of our ancestors. Disease is not our heritage. Our food traditions are one of this innate wellness, tangible reminders of our ancestors who could feed themselves and each other while stewarding the land and the water. All these traditions are more powerful than any of the forces that have ravaged our food systems or our bodies. So I'll just share one thing which I hope also intros our next speakers. One of the most transformative places of sisterhood has been with Sama-Sama Co-op. And to me, that's where I learned what is the flavor of our resistance. So years ago, don't put you on the spot here, Selena. It's summertime, and the garden by Lake Merritt is buzzing with laughter and song from Sama-Sama Co-op. Founded to reclaim Filipino-American language and culture and social justice, the co-op also embraces a reconnection to food and land. So every July, we would visit our friend Farmer Kristen, and on this particular day, Kristen walked us through a living rainbow of fiery marigolds and fragrant herbs and squash, sharing how so many of these plant relatives have survived colonization, military occupation, and ecological uprooting. We finally came to a crop that Kristen loved to save for our camp, a maroon red variety of sitaw or long beans. Everyone familiar with this? Yes. Kristen had told me these kids treat it like candy. And she'd noted that on our first visit 5 years ago when Soluna had started putting it in her braces. So ever since, long beans have been one of the crops that she continues to generously share with us. It's later as we begin to prepare a communal meal that I was struck by the fact that recipes like these had nearly so escaped me when I was the camper's age, but now they could be something, a standby for a new generation. As the cooking pot filled to the brim, I could smell a stewing of ancestral soul, California soil, diaspora seeds, and the possibility of their young hands. Thank you, and welcome our friends.
Good afternoon, everybody. Magandang hapon. My name is Lisa Huachon. My pronouns are she, her, sha. I am a co-founder and parent alumni of Sama-Sama Cooperative. And I'm joined here by...
I'm Soluna Ibarra Tacto. I use she, ella, sha pronouns.
So our contribution to this amazing anthology was our origin story of Sama-Sama, and the format we used was oral her story interview process where the youth back in 2019 developed questions and nice, okay, I like that. We got music, background music. So, you know, the youth interviewed the co-founding mamas of the cooperative. So Luna was one of them. I just want to give a shout out to our article. There was 8 of us in it, so me and Soluna are just 2 among 8, and I just want to give a shout out to Gayla, Gina, Calder, Liam, my son Basilio. Some of them are here in the audience, so they were also contributors. So I just want to thank them. It's hard. People always describe Sama-Sama as having this magic sauce, and it's really hard to describe what that is in words. I feel a tremendous feeling here in this room with all of you, with all of these people that I respect so much, that I've known for decades. I feel a little bit like nervous and humbled. But I would say that Sama-Sama was built on the shoulders of many of these amazing women some of whom are not here with us today. My husband always reminds me that Manang Don would tell us, if you don't write your own story, someone else will. And I really am grateful for the opportunity to write Kasaysayan ng Sama-Sama, to tell her story of how this started. So Luna and I are going to give you a little taste of what Sama-Sama is like. We'll read a little bit of an excerpt, and then in the tradition of oral her stories, I'm going to interview Soluna and the impact that Sama-Sama has had on her. Our kids play kulintang in a community garden overlooking the estuary of Oakland's Lake Merritt. Outside of the ICE office in downtown San Francisco, their little hands hold large banners to demand the release of children in immigration detention centers throughout the country. Their chants are loud. At mealtime, they fill reusable plates with vegan pancit, ampalaya salad, rice, and purple balitao that they have made. The bigger kids play music together and sing songs like they've written, like Sama-Sama Tayo, and the little ones sing along. Together they laugh and they dance. Their parents enjoy singing too. During camping trips under the stars, they play Journey with guitars, savoring each karaoke note. Lola tells her immigration story as kids and parents listen quietly, sitting on colorful banigs.
It is all the big and small moments of Sama-Sama that assure us we have created something special. A community for our families grounded in the beauty of our Filipino culture and shared history. When we reclaim elements of our culture that we were forced to hide or forget, like our language, our history, our practices of bayanihan or kapwa, and growing, cooking, or eating our foods, we heal the wounds of colonization and assimilation.
Sama-Sama began in 2014 when a group of 5 Pinays living in the Bay decided to create a cooperative summer camp for their children. Their camp teaches Filipino language as well as Filipino and Filipino-American history and culture. It's become a 4-week summer camp, now with 30-plus families or so and maybe 60 children. All the families and children identify as Filipino but may have plural identities and are mixed racially and ethnically. We embrace the collaborative and cooperative way of working together, and we celebrate our youth's plural identities, whether they are mixed, Black-Filipino, and or gender fluid. Our curriculum straddles the social issues relevant to our youth and families and relates it back to the earth. Sama-Sama is all these intersecting things.
Sama-Sama has become much more than just a summer camp. Sama-Sama has been a part of our family's journeys to liberation and includes healing ourselves, healing in community, and building the world we want. Sama-Sama is the feminist act of centering our culture, our history, and our knowledge of the land as a source of strength. There is something about emergence, intuition, and relationship community that is particularly feminist. Like we just kind of had the idea and did it. We weren't hung up on a final product or outcome. Rather, we focused on building the container and being together, following what feels right and good, really leaning into relationships and building trust. We stand on the shoulders of our titas, nanays, lolas, and manangs who lived through war and colonization. We learn from their stories to resist and be resilient. We teach our children, trust yourself. Trust that the ancestors are speaking through you.
So in the original format, they interviewed us, and we told the story of why we came up with Sama-Sama. And so now I want to interview Soluna about her experience growing up in Sama-Sama. So Soluna, your mom was one of the co-founders. Aya is right there. You were also in Rice and Beans Preschool Cooperative, another amazing social justice space cooperative in the East Bay. So what was it like growing up in these cooperative spaces, including Sama-Sama?
I love Sama-Sama and I love Rice and Beans. And I love everything about it. I love all the people, especially. I like to think about a summer camp in a preschool. You don't always remember the summer camps or preschools you go to. who remembers their preschool, who remembers the people they meet in preschool, or like a summer camp. Like usually the friends you meet there, you know for a little bit, but then you don't like really remember them forever. And I feel like that's so different for Rice and Beans and for Sama Sama. The communities that the community in both Sama Sama and Rice and Beans is so big and so welcoming and is family. All my friends that I've made at Sama Sama and Rice and Beans, like I've known them since I was like super little, since I was like 5, and they're still my like best friends today. So I think that is like what it was like growing up, and everyone that like who was in Sama Sama made me feel so comfortable in being me. I feel like I could be myself in a way that I couldn't in other spaces, and so like with the titas and with the titos and with all the teachers and with my friends, like that was what being in those spaces was like.
So in Sama Sama, we do themes every summer, an element related to like a theme. So water and migration, fire and resistance, air and liberation, and the curriculum is kind of shaped around those themes. Also looking at like what's relevant and happening to us around us. Are there any particular themes or kind of moments from your years in Sama Sama that stood out to you or that you take away from the experience?
I think a lot about the water and migration years. We learned a lot about what immigration is, what's happening in our world currently, or like at the time, and even now currently, but also what are the immigration stories of our ancestors? How are we here today? And like, we did a lot of sharing and hearing other people's ancestors' immigration stories, their immigration stories, and then also like sharing our own. And so I always remembered that a lot, and fighting for like immigration rights, and there was a lot of that. Also a lot about solidarity. I think when we were doing like fire and resistance, we learned a lot about solidarity, and Tito J taught us about like the Black Panthers in Oakland, and we learned a lot about Black and Filipino solidarity, about the Black Lives Matter movement and why our struggles are interconnected. And so I think that was one of the big things that I really remember. So like a lot of connecting our own histories and our culture to what is currently going on today was always really important and something I always really value.
Yeah, and I remember that year that that fire and resistance year was when it was really popping off with Black Lives Matter, and there was a youth in the East Bay in Oakland that led some of the marches, including Sama Sama and Young People for Black Lives. So that's really amazing. What do you get from Sama Sama that you might not get in like regular school, like during the school year?
Sama Sama has so many dynamic parts of it. There are so many aspects of Sama Sama. We learned cooking, Filipino martial arts, eskrima, dance, a lot about connection to the earth, and gardening, and a lot of that. I have so many memories like climbing trees in Sama Sama. So there's a lot of like aspects of that. Just so many different things, a lot of music. I learned to rap in Sama Sama, and I love rapping Ruby Bara, so that's always something that I remember. But I think that what was the question? That's a lot, and a lot of learning about ourselves and like who we are, and like our own families, our culture, our identities. I know this is actually like a question we're gonna ask, but I learned a lot about like who I am as a person and how I identify and what makes me me, and being Mexipina, being Mexicana, Chicana, and Filipina, how I show up fully in every space I walk into. My parents and my mom and my dad always taught me this, but also Sama-Sama is that I'm not half Mexican and I'm not half Filipina. I'm fully Mexipina. And so, being confident and secure in who I am and my identity as being Mexipina, but also being able to explore being queer and like every aspect of my identity is something that I got from Sama-Sama that I feel like you don't get at school. So,
Thank you, Selena. I think that's time. Give it up to Selena.
Wow, thank you. I am really enjoying this. I hope you are too. My name is Nikki Fortunato Bass, and I really want to thank Jen for allowing me actually the time to reflect on my journey. So my essay is called, okay. So thank you, Jen. I'm realizing when I reread my essay last night, it was really amazing to have the opportunity to reflect on my journey. So my essay is called My Unexpected Journey from Lifelong Organizer to Elected Official, from being colonized to intersections and solidarity. My mother from Mindoro speaks Tagalog, and my father from Cebu speaks Visayan. But at home we spoke English. My parents later told me it was because English was their common language, the colonizers' language. Looking back, what I experienced as my Filipino culture was mostly the culture of these colonizers. Catholic Mass every Sunday, followed by lunch at a fast food restaurant, Sunday school, confirmation, communion, and confession, and Christmas Mass and toys under a fake tree. I thought of the lumpia, pancit, and lechon we ate as true parts of my Filipino heritage. But lumpia and pancit have Chinese origins, and the Spaniards brought lechon. The Philippines has been called the melting pot of Asia, but I prefer to think that we are like halo-halo, mixing and incorporating other cultural practices to decolonize them and make them our own. In my early 20s, I was fortunate to connect with the Asian immigrant women advocates and learn how to organize shoulder to shoulder with Chinese immigrant garment workers who were cheated out of their wages. That was right in Oakland, Chinatown, the heart of the district I now represent as an Oakland City Council member. The city's most diverse district where over 100 languages are spoken. We picketed the designer Jessica McClintock week after week with the garment workers who sewed her dresses without pay until they won accountability from the company. Organizing with these brave immigrant women workers taught me about justice and gave me the determination to fight for it. I spent 2 decades organizing with immigrant and low-wage workers, with grassroots communities, raising Oakland's minimum wage, winning paid sick days, securing good jobs and affordable housing from economic development. And in 2007, I got involved with an ad hoc group of neighbors and activists who had supported the prior District 2 council member, whom I also supported. 3 years after campaigning to get him into office, we were looking for someone to run against him. He ran as a progressive, but in his first year of office, he began to disappoint the base of people who elected him by aligning with more moderate council members, voting against 100% affordable housing, and against the interests of Oakland's workers and renters. This ad hoc group tried to identify a candidate more aligned with our values. I asked a few people to run, and they said, no way. A few people asked me, and I laughed it off, saying, I don't want that job. It's difficult, it's thankless, it even pays less than the nonprofit that I work for. And you have to be public 24/7. Then time moved on, and I started to think with my heart and with my gut. I talked with my coach, and she said, I lit up as I talked about the possibility of running for office. She said it gave me visible energy, and then I began to feel a connection to my purpose. So we had an exploratory meeting with my friend Mary Rose. It was at her house. I'm not sure if she's here today. And my old and new friends ended up organizing me into running for office. It was completely unexpected. But it felt right in my heart and my gut. This is what I want to do for my community, for Oakland, I thought. And my partner, my daughter, my friends, and allies were with me. We wanted a true progressive leader rooted in organizing and communities. We wanted a proactive and effective leader. We wanted an API on the city council and our first Pinay council member. So my goal as a progressive leader is not only to pass progressive policy, my goal is to build a progressive movement. Central to that is contesting for power, power for liberation. I don't just represent Filipino and API communities or the residents of my district in the context of racism and white supremacy, of heteropatriarchy in our society, and deep inequality in our economy. I represent all Oaklanders who are working hard and are still here, threatened by displacement, but fighting to stay home. Filipinos are the third largest Asian American subgroup after Chinese and Indian Americans, and we do not have the representation, the proportionate representation in the halls of government in California nor the nation. We have a great deal to contribute to our communities. In fact, I think that our halo-halo culture allows us to hold both our ethnic identity and our broader sense of community and solidarity at the same time. So I've served for 6 years on the Oakland City Council and also serve as our council president. Today, I'm running to be the first Pinay to represent us as a supervisor at the County of Alameda. And this is the update to the essay. As a progressive, effective woman of color elected official, I'm proud of the policies that I've won working hand in hand with community. These policies have concretely improved people's lives around their economic conditions, their housing conditions, their health conditions. Yet today we're facing a progressive backlash. I've been viciously attacked this election cycle and actually over many years as I've stood up for Black lives and all of our lives. But I know that we are resilient and we will continue to fight for our liberation. And I want to invite you all to join me and join other progressive women of color who are fighting this election cycle to represent all of us. And this wouldn't be complete without shouting out and thanking a couple of my Pinay sisters who've been with me on this journey since the beginning. Angelica and Gayla especially. And also Jess, who is in the front on my campaign team right now. So thank you again to all of you. It's been really beautiful to listen to my Pinay sisters and to just hear about all of the ways that we are fighting for our liberation. Thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, good afternoon. We're on. Hi, good afternoon, magandang hapon, hapunan. So hopefully folks are okay with staying for a little longer. So the title of my piece, my contribution to this volume was entitled Pasamahal, Revolutionary Love, Dissident Friendships, and Pinay Scholar Activist Praxis in the Ivory Tower. It's kind of interesting to be here in this space, talking about this contribution. So much has shifted for me since I wrote it. So I'm no longer in academia, but I do feel like there's still so much about that chapter and how I've been thinking about it in from where I sit now that I think can still be really instructive for folks outside of academia. But just some background. So I was really invited to contribute. I mean, this piece really emerged out of, at a moment. So at the moment, I had just become full professor. I had just become chair of Asian American Studies, UC Davis. I was the first Pinay to serve in that capacity. We had just successfully launched through a very grassroots organizing effort, the Bolosan Center for Filipinic Studies. There was so much about that moment that I had seemed to achieve all of these great heights in academia. And I had been asked to speak about that experience. And I think a lot of what I wanted to be able to foreground in this chapter, in the talk that originated this chapter, was how so much of what that was about was never just about me. That it was so much about these relationships that I had cultivated in lots of spaces, cultivated outside of academia, and cultivated inside of academia. And so when I wrote it, I really wrote this as a kind of love letter to Val, who has been in so many roles over the course of our now 20-year relationship. From just, I think, I was fangirling Val in the streets of San Francisco in front of the federal building around both, the war on terror and also just, in support of immigrant justice against deportations and detentions, deportations. And I remember, seeing her at a rally. There's me in the back when I used to have the pixie hair. And there was Val. Just being so struck by this young San Francisco State undergrad, and just really, admiring her, just that fierceness and that clarity and sharpness as she was sharing her experiences with this immigration system. And it was really in that moment, being in that rally space together, that I felt this kind of kinship and warmth of love towards Val because of our shared commitments of being in the streets. And not just being in the streets, because so much of organizing isn't just showing up on the streets. It's the meetings that you attend to make those demonstrations happen. And so, we were brought together in the context of struggle, and it really, I think, opened the door to the kind of relationship we ended up having. So I didn't really know Val like that, but we came to know later that she had a shared interest with me in kind of pursuing academia. I was on my way out of my PhD program at UC Berkeley. She was on her way into academia. And just being in those streets, being kin in that way that, this term is a term from feminist scholars, dissident friendships. Immediately this kind of sense of connection that came out of this. And so, she came to my house. I was like, you need to come to my house. Let's talk. And so, she came to my house, having just met on the streets at a rally. And I said, let's talk. We're going to do this journey together. And, not knowing each other, but knowing each other in such a deeper way, I invited Val to follow me to New Jersey when I took on my first faculty position. And she was pursuing just exploring grad school options. But anyhow, that's a lot of context just to say that, it was really a reflection. And I'm not going to go into the details of it. Read the book. But I do really try to unpack and kind of narrate the story of how these friendships forged in the context of collective struggle. I took a lot of those sensibilities with me as I continued on in academia. I didn't do academia in the way that we were meant to do it. There is a way that academia is about being isolated. It is about carving out, your own, name. It's about making a name for yourself, engaging in critique to do that work. And I didn't really want to be in that space in that way. I wanted to be in a space where it could be generative, where we can be in conversation and dialogue, where we could build together. And I got a lot of that sense of how to be in academia through my work as an organizer. And so, I wanted that to be foregrounded when I wrote this chapter, that we when we are negotiating these institutions that we know are not made for us. They are not made for us. How do we negotiate? And I was really trying to kind of speak against too, because there's a lot out there now, especially now, with more and more women of color going in academia, all these tools on how to make it in that space. I didn't want to participate in that conversation either. I don't want to give you the tools to make it in that space so you lose who you are. So for me, being an organizer, applying how I created community in the context of academia, like an organizer, is what allowed me to still be able to show up as authentically as I felt like I could. And so, there's a little kind of thing, I don't know what the thing is. So just a quick excerpt from the chapter that you should just read. We don't even have to advance the slide. It's not that one either. It's okay, but she's a good quote. Read that one and read that for yourselves. But at any rate, okay. Yes, I think this is the original slide that we thought we were editing. But it's okay. But the point is simply that, I kind of coined this term kasamahal in trying to describe kind of the activist, community organizers' insights I sort of brought into academia that brought me into relationship to Val. Excuse me. And all the things that came from it. I mean, Val and I have been collaborating for many, many years. And I think what's just crucial to know is that so much of how I move today isn't because I was her mentor, but we were always in relation as friends, as colleagues, as comrades. And I've learned so much, and so much of who I am today as a thinker and a teacher is so much from my friendship with this woman. So that was the purpose of the chapter. Now I have two other points around it. For folks who are not in academia, and I think, the one point is really that this notion of kasamahal is something I hope that folks in other institutional organizational spaces can take. And that is that, it is, and it's a flip on the imposter syndrome too. In another place I've sort of talked about what it means to be an imposter, but to volunteer to be an imposter. That we're kind of being imposters because we're spying and taking things away from this institution to serve ourselves. But also, creating community and ways of being to center love for ourselves, our community, in these institutional spaces that aren't meant for us. And so I feel like that's still, even though I wrote that chapter in the context of academia, I feel like that insight about bringing love into these spaces where it doesn't exist, bringing that kind of approach to being an imposter, places where it doesn't exist, is really still crucial. And I have some other kind of thoughts just about activism or activist cultures that I think also come from that chapter, but I'm just going to pass it on to Val from here.
Thank you, Robin, for your honesty, bravery. My name is Valerie, and I have a contribution to this anthology. It's called Kasama Mama, Filipino Mother Work. And I also co-wrote with organizers and activists the genealogy on Gabriela USA. It's included in another section, another pathway of the book. I know we're super over time, and I really told Robin to take her time and say all the things that she needed to say. She came from Lake County, like at 6 a.m. And thank you so much for sticking around till this very end. I have just two things to say. What you see up here is a picture of me and Amado. Kaya, who is 7 years old in this picture. The summer that I came to do an internship with Robin, the internship was half learning sociology and half playing soccer with this kid that I got to hang out with all the time. Raul, my partner, took this picture of us, a 7-year-old Amado who just was always bouncing off walls and, talking about video games. And so much like Soluna, just saying all the good things, the right things, to teach us how to be good to each other. On the other side, you see Robin, my son's side, who's 7, same age as Amado, many lifetimes ago, but the same lifetime. And I think about what I've learned from Robin and the Kasama Mama, Filipino Mother Work chapter. And I look in this audience and I see Carmela and I see Nikki and all these other moms who are helping me raise Sai. And thinking about just how many times we have switched roles from student, teacher, collaborator, organizer, someone who says, come over, I'm gonna cook for you, and you can sit down, or go to Costco, whatever. Thank you. And I think when we talk about dissident friendships, when we talk about Kasamahal, really the question I want to leave this conversation with is what anchors us? How do we become in good relation to one another? Whether it is you're a colleague of mine, a writer, a new person I've met today, someone in movement building spaces, in my classroom, a student in my classroom, someone in my research project, someone who's helping me get through the next hoop in academia. My friendship with Robin, my sisterhood with Robin, has really taken me from places of recovery, of grief and loss. There's so many things we grieve and we lose as moms, as Kasamas, as Filipinas, and that in this anthology, what is closer to liberation is an honest and vulnerable way where we can ask the question, how are we in good relation to one another, to our communities, to the non-human world? And these questions that anchor me to my day-to-day really show me that a big part of why we're here today is we see one another in each other's words and poetry and stories, in images and in song. I think maybe I will end by saying that I think that the best way I've learned how to be in radical care relationships is in community with Filipino care workers, organizing our own little potlucks, the best fish lumpias you've ever tasted, and Whitney Houston on karaoke all day, every day. This is the spaces where I learned how to be in good relation. And Robin was essential in helping me in those spaces and always believing in me. All parts of me. And I think when we're lucky enough to find people to journey together with us, in the times where you don't write anything, and in the times where you birth books and babies and ideas and events and initiatives and farms, that we can then be in good relation. It's not somewhere there. It's not somewhere in the future, and that perhaps it can be now. Thank you. Maraming salamat.
Photo, please. And while everybody's gathering up their stuff, let's just end this all with one isang bagsak. Okay? So let's do actually the unity clap leading up, all right?